Kelly Dwyer's story is one that begins like so many others, full of promise, full of laughter, full of ordinary days that felt like stepping stones toward a bright future. She was 27 years old, living in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, a city that has its own rhythm of energy, opportunity, and nightlife. Kelly was the kind of young woman who left an impression wherever she went. Friends remembered her as outgoing, adventurous, and radiant, with a smile that could light up a room. She loved yoga, loved spending time with people, and carried with her that unmistakable energy of someone who was still discovering all the things life might have in store. She was young, hopeful, and like so many people in their 20s, balancing the search for stability with the thrill of adventure. But what makes her story so haunting is not the light she brought into the world, but how abruptly and mysteriously that light was extinguished. On October 10, 2013, Kelly vanished. And what followed was a mystery that would unravel slowly, painfully, across years, until the truth finally emerged in a courtroom where her name became forever tied to one man, a man who lived a double life and whose secrets became her undoing. That night began like countless others. Kelly made plans, enjoyed her evening, and eventually crossed paths with a man named Chris Zacco. To those who didn't know him well, Chris appeared polished, successful, and stable. He worked in finance, lived in a luxury high-rise downtown, and seemed to embody the image of someone moving confidently through adulthood. But beneath the surface, his world was far darker. He was entrenched in drugs, alcohol, and reckless habits that eroded any sense of control. Kelly had known him, had spent time in his orbit before, and on that October night, she went back to his apartment with him. Security cameras confirmed it. Kelly was seen entering the building with Chris. But after that moment, the trail ended. No camera ever recorded her leaving. No one saw her walk out. It was as though she had stepped into a place from which she would never return. The next morning, alarm bells began to ring. Kelly failed to show up for work, and for those who knew her, that absence was unthinkable. She was reliable, responsible, not someone who simply disappeared without explanation. Friends called her phone. No answer. Hours became days. Her parents were contacted, and panic set in. A missing persons report was filed, and the search for Kelly began in earnest. Police quickly turned their attention to the man who had last seen her, Chris Zacco. He admitted she had been at his apartment, admitted they had spent time together, but insisted she had left the next morning. According to him, she simply walked out the door. But investigators had a problem with that story. No surveillance footage ever backed it up. The building's cameras showed her going in, but not coming out. If she had left, how? And if she hadn't, what had happened inside those walls? As detectives began digging into Chris Zacco's background, the polished exterior began to crumble. The man with the finance career and the nice apartment was living a life fueled by cocaine, prescription pills, and alcohol. He was deeply immersed in Milwaukee's drug scene, often hosting gatherings that blurred the lines between parties and binges. Kelly, friends said, had been experimenting, stepping into that world cautiously, perhaps drawn by the excitement, but not fully aware of the danger. When police searched Zacco's apartment, they found drugs and evidence of heavy use. But what they did not find was any trace of Kelly. No body, no obvious signs of violence. Without physical evidence, the investigation became more complicated. Suspicion clung to Zacco, but suspicion alone would not be enough to bring him to justice. For Kelly's family, the days that followed became a nightmare. Her mother and father clung to hope, but also feared the worst. Friends posted flyers, organized searches, and pleaded for information. The city became aware of her disappearance, her photos circulating across news outlets, her story whispered in coffee shops and offices. People wondered how a young woman could vanish into thin air in a modern city with cameras and police resources. But vanish she did, and the mystery dragged on. Weeks turned into months. Months turned into years. Kelly's name remained in the headlines, but the answers never came. Zacco was arrested and convicted on unrelated charges, drug possession, witness intimidation, but nothing tied him directly to Kelly's disappearance. Her case hovered in limbo, a wound that would not heal, a question that would not be answered. Then, in 2015, everything changed. Nearly 2 years after Kelly went missing, searchers discovered human remains in a rural area outside Milwaukee. Forensic testing confirmed what her family had feared all along. The remains belonged to Kelly Dwyer. The young woman whose face had been frozen on posters and news screens was gone, her body discarded in a remote area as though her life had meant nothing. The discovery shifted everything. No longer a missing person case, it became a homicide, and the focus returned squarely to Chris Zacco. The trial that followed revealed the complexity and darkness of the case. Prosecutors argued that Kelly had died inside Zacco's apartment, whether through violence, recklessness, or a combination of drugs and abuse. They emphasized that she was last seen alive with him, that she never walked out of that building, that he had every reason to lie. They painted Zacco as a man living a double life, outwardly respectable, inwardly spiraling. Witnesses testified about his drug use, his manipulative behavior, and the chaos of his lifestyle. The defense countered with a grim but different narrative. They claimed that Kelly's death had been accidental, the result of an overdose. According to them, Zacco panicked, made terrible choices, and disposed of her body in fear. They insisted that while he had acted horribly after the fact, he had not murdered her. The courtroom became the stage for a battle of narratives, each side presenting a story of what had happened behind the closed door of that apartment. But one fact remained unshakable. Kelly had entered that place alive, and she had never left. Jurors listened to weeks of testimony, to experts, to family members who spoke of Kelly's life and loss. They weighed the evidence, or lack of it, against the undeniable truth that her remains had been hidden, discarded in a way that spoke of intent, not accident. When the verdict came, it brought with it a mixture of relief and sorrow. Chris Zacco was found guilty of charges connected to Kelly's death. He was sentenced to decades in prison, a punishment that ensured he would spend much of his life behind bars. For Kelly's parents, it was a measure of justice, though never enough. How could it be enough? No sentence, no verdict, no words spoken in court could bring back the daughter they had lost. Even after the trial, questions lingered. What exactly happened in those final hours? Was it a sudden burst of violence? Was it drugs that spiraled out of control? The full truth may never be known, because the only two people who truly knew were Kelly and the man responsible for her death. And Kelly would never have the chance to tell her story. What remained was her memory. For her family, her friends, and the city that had watched her case unfold, Kelly Dwyer was remembered not for the crime that ended her life, but for the joy and warmth she had brought while she was alive. Her story became a reminder of the dangers that can hide behind polished facades, of the risks that can come from trust placed in the wrong person, and of the enduring pain left behind when violence takes a life too soon. Years later, her case still resonates. It reminds people of how fragile safety can be, how quickly an ordinary night can become a tragedy. It is a story of justice sought, of grief endured, of a family forced to move forward with a hole in their lives that could never be filled. Kelly Dwyer's name is spoken not just as a victim of crime, but as a daughter, a friend, a woman whose life was stolen. And in the end, the story of Kelly Dwyer is not just about the man who took her life, but about the people who refused to let her be forgotten, about the investigators who never stopped searching, about the prosecutors who fought for accountability, about the family who carried her memory through the darkest years. Her light, though dimmed, has never gone out completely, because those who loved her continued to keep it alive. Kelly Dwyer was 27 years old when she disappeared, and though her story ended far too soon, her legacy endures in the cautionary tale of what happened to her, and in the love of those who still remember her not as a victim, but as the vibrant, beautiful soul she truly was.